Hello and welcome to this edition of Search Sessions, where we meet and speak to inspiring C-suite leaders, those that have sat at the top of the board or on a board and are now inspiring others through leadership, mentoring, training, or being thought leaders in their space. Today, I'm joined by Chris Hirst, former client of mine. Chris has had a sparkling advertising career working for agencies including BBH, Fallon, the award-winning run as CEO of Grey, and most recently as global CEO of Havas. Chris is now a best-selling author, and we're very lucky to have him here today. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So, Chris, I'm fascinated. After such a long and inspiring career, as well as inspiring others, has leadership and leadership techniques changed over the last 20, 30 years?
Well, I get asked that question quite a lot. And I sort of dodge it usually because my view is that I have a pretty well developed view of my own about what good leadership is, and I've written a book about that. But what I'm not is a leadership historian. So, I can give you a but, well, in my opinion, kind of answer to that. I mean, I think that society has changed because society always changes. I don't think, that's just the normal run of things. And so therefore, if society's changed, therefore culture changes. Therefore, I don't think people change, but people are influenced by, maybe we'll come and talk about this. Culture is whether it be in a society or in an organization, in a company, culture is an incredibly powerful influence on just about all aspects of our behavior. And so if the culture that we live and grow up in changes, then to an extent, people appear to change, let's say that. And so therefore, probably, yes, long-winded answer to your question, yes, leaders have to approach the task differently to perhaps how they would have done 30 years ago. I think that would be a reasonably safe assumption.
Well, let's talk about culture then. I always feel fortuitous to have been lucky enough to work with Grey during the period that you were transforming it. And, there was this perception in the industry at one point, the first part of your tenure, where it was kind of Grey by name, Grey by nature, the big juggernaut ship of WPP. And then you were made CEO. How did you change the culture? What was your strategy, Chris?
Well, the first thing to say is, leadership isn't a solo act. It never is. And I think leaders that think that it is and behave like it is will fall short. And we can probably all think of some examples. So I definitely didn't do it on my own. I was part of a very talented leadership team. So that's the first thing that's important to say. But I think the first thing to understand about culture is how incredibly powerful it is in terms of how we all aspects of how we manifest ourselves, how we feel, how we behave, how we tackle problems, how we interact with other people. Crucially, how do we deal with the people around us? And yet, despite the fact that it's so potent, culture in terms of shaping our behaviors, I think in most organizations, and that's a pretty sweeping statement, but I believe it's true. I think in most organizations, and I deliberately say organizations, not businesses, because you can apply this to sports teams, whatever, hospital wards, school departments, everywhere. In most organizations, the leadership has little conscious understanding of what the real culture is within that organization. And we all know from personal experience that if you go and look at the website, it'll give you some guff about what it thinks the culture is. But everybody in the organization knows that has no relationship at all to what's actually the real culture. And so the first thing about culture is to, as a leader, is to shift, I think, from a kind of subconscious, unspoken acceptance that it is what it is, to a conscious state where you actively try and understand what the culture is today. You actively have a point of view on what you'd like it to be. Now, just doing those two things, frankly, would put you ahead of the pack of most people in leadership positions. Just consciously thinking, what is it? What do I want it to be? Now, that, by the way, that is nevertheless the easy bit, but it's an important first step. Really, the best way to understand what culture is, consciously or not, is that it is the behavior of leadership. So the most defining force, the most powerful force in terms of shaping any culture, is how leaders behave, not what they say, what they do. In the best cultures, the culture says what it would like to be, and leadership actively define the behaviors that will shape that culture, and they then hold themselves to account to that. And in a sort of, I say roundabout way, because frankly, when I took the job, I don't think I did really know what I was doing, but in the end, that is what we did.
Interesting. So if you look back, and the reason that I talk about it being a unique case study is because I've never seen anything like that in that particular industry before. But you and Nils, you talk about the broader leadership team: Natalie Graham, Lucy Jameson, Bill Scott, Leo Raymond, Vicky. It was like for me, it was like an all-star cast of my clients at other agencies, all coming into one place. And I've always wanted to ask how you did that, from a talent perspective, how you were able to convince those great leaders of other businesses to join you on that journey.
People should act in a sense of enlightened self-interest. Okay. And that's kind of, that's kind of the fundamental underpinnings, I suppose, of capitalism, right? But I think that people should act in enlightened self-interest. And so if you want to attract talented people to work for you, they have to believe, they know that they're good. Good people know that they're good, and the better somebody is, the more choices they have. And so, I think they could look at you and think, well, look, I can see why it's in your interests for me to come and work for you, but what's in it for me? And I think really, as a leader, you have to kind of make people believe, and then you have to deliver in the sense that you're going to be good for their careers. That you actively are going to kind of have them on your to-do list, and that is not entirely altruistic, because if you are a leader, for you, it's a very high bar to be good for somebody's career. That isn't just about you like being a nice bloke who takes them for a nice like pint every 6 months. In fact, it's got nothing at all to do with that, really. It's to be good for somebody's career, you've got to be doing an awful lot of things right. You really. An awful lot of things with regard to them, and an awful lot of things with regard to the wider organization, including culture, including somewhere that they actually quite enjoy coming to work, including somewhere that they think that you as a leader or the leadership team have got their back. And I think that's really important, creating that high trust environment. And I think also, I don't think leadership is a popularity contest, but I do think the most effective leaders, people around them like them. I think that matters. They don't have to be best friends, but I think that does help. Let's say that.
Yes, yeah,
and I think that, and I think that goes both ways. I mean, we had a very talented team at Great, but I mean, they weren't the only talented people in London, but that team, I think we liked each other, and I think that counts for quite a lot.
You talk a lot about sport being an influence, certainly an influence on my thoughts on kind of leadership. How much have you included your knowledge of sport, love of sport, within your role as a leader?
I try not to. Honestly, I kind of try not to. I find it a bit. I find it a bit cliched, and I find it so when I write about leadership. I mean, I have drawn parallels because I think there are strong parallels. And sport provides very clear win-lose outcomes. It's and it kind of within very easy, universally understood kind of guidelines. Okay, the rules of the game, somebody wins the game or loses the game, and business tends to be a bit messier than that. So sport provides nice easy analogies. But at the same time, I find it a bit cliched. So when I do write about leadership, I have used sport analogies, but I try and moderate them, if you see what I mean. Because I think there are similarities, like we've just discussed, but there are clear differences as well. And yeah, I think that's probably what I think about it. I think it's useful up to a point. The thing that I think is directly comparable is culture. I think you see, because culture affects everybody's performance everywhere, and so you see in sport, because it is so, compared to business, so kind of clear in terms of its how a team is doing or not doing. Then you can see the effect of culture really readily. I mean, I don't know if you're a cricket fan. I know cricket's quite polarizing, but I think what Brendan McCullum and Ben Stokes have done for the England cricket team is a jaw-dropping, example of the transformational power of leadership. It is an example. I cannot think if I have seen anything anywhere as astonishing as that, in terms of a demonstration of the utterly transformative power of leadership. It is literally the same individuals, same individuals, and it happened instantly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's interesting about it as well, is people will talk about culture, and leaders are quite often a bit kind of fatalistic, if you like, about culture. They'll go, oh yeah, I know culture's not great, but I mean, what can I do about it? It takes ages to change culture, and it doesn't. It doesn't. You can change it on a dime, but you got to want to change it. And if it's not right, the reason that leaders find it hard to do is because the first person that needs to change is them, and that's, as we all know, quite hard.
Interesting thoughts. So now best-selling author, when did you start writing the book, and what inspired you to write the book?
Well, I started writing it, I would say now probably in about 2017. Took a couple of years to, well, no, it took about a year to write. Then it takes at least a year to get from a finished to published. And in fact, to be honest, that was quite quick, because once I'd written it, I was like, come on, let's get it out. So, and in fact, my second book comes out on the 1st of June this year. What inspired me to write it? To be honest, it was a chance thing. I was asked to do a speech, I was asked to talk to a few graduates about leadership. I was given a 20-minute slot, and I thought, and like most people, I didn't really think about it until like a day before, and I thought, well, shit, I've got to do this speech tomorrow on leadership. And I thought, well, God, how on earth am I going to say something that isn't just the same old bullshit, frankly? And so I did it. It went okay. I got back home, and I thought, oh, I wonder if there's more in that, And so what I did was, I thought, well, there might be an article, there might be a 10,000 word paper, or there might be a book. I don't know, and I'm not going to know until I sit and actually physically start to write it. So that's what I did. I just started writing, and I wrote 5,000 words, and I thought, yeah, I've probably got a bit more to go. So I wrote another 5,000, and then when I got to about 20,000, I actually went and I hunted down somebody who could actually give me some professional advice and help, and specifically whether or not it was worth carrying on, basically, which I was encouraged to do. So I went from there.
And one of the themes in your book that I know has been commented on a lot, but resonates with me is the late great Colin Powell's 40-70 rule.
Yeah,
Can you
yeah.
explain a little bit more to the readers and listeners about that?
Well, yeah, it's about decision making, and so I do a chapter on decision making, and I talk to people quite a lot about decision making, because basically decision making is how you get stuff done. And again, like a lot of things, the more I talk about leadership, the more I think about it, the more I realize so many things actually do just end up being a sort of a subset of culture, and you could argue that decision making is that as well. So basically, we all know from first-hand experience that working for somebody who's indecisive is unbelievably frustrating at the very least, and all of us, and I include myself, because everything I've written about pretty well, all the errors, or all the how not to do it, I was speaking from personal experience, and we've all been in leadership teams where we meet with whatever frequency every week. Let's say we meet at the same time, the same place, and we talk about the same things. Every meeting we get back together and talk about the same things, and nothing ever happens. And what you realize is doing that just very quickly erodes a team's confidence. Confidence really matters, and the way you gain confidence as a leader or a leadership team is you physically feel like you can take control of events rather than events controlling you. And the way you take control of events is you take decisions. That's the only way. Otherwise, you're like I always say that leadership is the difference between being a sailing ship and a cork. A cork on the ocean is you're battered by the winds, the tides, the currents, but the cork has no influence where it goes at all. It just ends up where the sort of net effect of those forces take it. A sailing ship is still acted on by winds, tides, and currents, but the captain understands how to navigate their way from A to B. It's not a straight line in a sailing ship because of those forces, but net the captain gets from A to B. And I think that's what leadership is about, and that's what decision making is about. So the reason that people are bad decision makers basically is because they delay making a decision. And they delay making a decision because they're worried about the decision being wrong. I mean, it's human nature. But if you think about what a decision is just a choice that you make when you are uncertain about the outcome. So by definition, a decision is a choice with an uncertain outcome. Therefore, if it's an uncertain outcome, sometimes it's not going to work out how you hope, no matter how long you delay, how much research you do, how many opinions you go and ask. If you're certain about the outcome, it's not a decision. I mean, if going right is huge success and going left is a disaster, then I mean, who goes left? So what Colin Powell's 40-70 rule is he says, don't make a decision if you're less than 40% certain. So don't shoot from the hip. But if you're more than 70% certain, you've waited too long. So he's saying to leaders, live in this 40-70 zone, because the thing that will guarantee failure is not making enough decisions quickly enough. So you have to accept that some decisions, perhaps many decisions, will not work out quite how you hoped. But that's just an inevitable part of leadership. And in sort of in return for that, so if you like, the trade-off you make, the positive benefit of that is that you demonstrate to yourself and those around you that you are prepared to take steps to control your circumstances. And that's what leaders need to do.
Interesting. It's a really interesting subject matter, and I urge anyone that hasn't picked up a copy of No Bullshit Leadership to do that, and I certainly do for any sort of leaders I meet. Just like to finish on talking about education, Chris. Obviously as a man educated at Oxford, Harvard, and I'm sure has been on numerous leadership courses. What advice would you give to leaders out there about the importance of continual professional development?
Well, I haven't been on lots of leadership courses, in truth. And my dirty secret is I don't read many business books either. But I don't think that matters, because I think continuous professional development, I think continuous personal development is a better way to think about it. I think that good leaders and good teams learn to learn. And there's lots of ways of doing that, but I think it's if you it's a nice follow on from the last question, because I think if you accept that decisions or many decisions aren't going to work out exactly how you expect, the consequence is you as a leader have to then go and make more decisions. So each decision kind of feeds onto the next. And John Cleese, I think it was, I'm not going to say this very eloquently, but basically he said everybody wangs on, it's very fashionable to talk about failure and how incredibly useful failure is. Well, there's two things. First of all, when it happens to you, it's really hard. So that I mean, you hear people talk about it after the event, but when you're in that hole, it's tough. That's why leadership's tough. But also what Cleese said, well, of course, yeah, failure is only helpful if you learn anything from it. If all you do is just keep making the same mistakes, then that's just a disaster. And so what leaders and leadership teams need to do is they need to learn, or they need to develop, I think, a learning culture. And again, we're back to that word culture. And you have to make sure that you personally, I think that's just a good thing, but you personally, and in terms of a professional sense, let's say, really what matters is that you and your team have a culture that is prepared to make decisions, accepts those decisions sometimes won't work out how you want, and then is able to learn from those so that you can kind of iterate your way forward. And I think that learning to learn really matters. And by the way, I am, even though, you know, I'm not a student by any sense of leadership. I have a very clear view about what leadership is, and I'm very clear, if you read my book or buy the training or anything like that, that my view is it's a craft, not a science. It's a practitioner. You should learn about leadership from leaders. You wouldn't learn to fly from somebody who'd never been in an aeroplane, so don't learn to lead from somebody who's never led. And so it is a craft, and it's a craft you have to develop for yourself. But in terms of education, I'm incredibly passionate about education, because I think that's how we learn to navigate and understand the world. Okay, being educated, which is different to qualifications. I mean, qualifications matter as well. If somebody's gonna, I don't know, do brain surgery on me, I'd quite like them to have some qualifications as well as being well read. But nevertheless, but education and qualifications are not the same thing, and we conflate those two. I think being educated, whatever that means to you, being curious, those sort of stuff, wanting to understand how things work, or just wanting to understand, just wanting to, learn Shakespeare's sonnets, whatever floats boat. I think none of that is wasted. And there's a great quote, I can never remember who said it, but anyway, he was a headmaster at Eton in the 19th century, and he said, "The shadow of lost knowledge protects us from many illusions." And I think it's such a powerful expression of why education matters, because he's saying a number of things. First of all, he's saying just knowing stuff helps you not get bullshitted. I mean, in crude terms, it helps you, even if it's something you don't know something about. You have the confidence to know that you can understand it if you need to and want to. And it also says to you, even if you learn something and you forget it, the shadow of that remains. You know that you knew it once, and if you need it again, you can go back and find it again. And I think, but if it's never there in the first place, it's you don't know what you don't know. So I do think education is really important. I think education is really important for us. I think being curious, and I think leaders who are curious and want to understand how things work, want to understand how people work in inverted commas, and want to understand why the world is as it is, will be more effective leaders. And I think that's a bit about going on leadership courses, but frankly, perhaps that's just going to the theatre once a week as well. Maybe that's just as useful.
Continual learning.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, look, Chris, you mentioned the second book's coming out in June. I wish you all the best success with that. Thank you for your time today.
I'm going to do one more plug. Second book out in June, and right now this month working on an online leadership program based on the first book, which will soft launch in about June, July as well. So look out for that. We're looking for people to sign up for the kind of beta tests and all that kind of thing. So
Well,
Yeah,
you'll have me. You'll have me in there.
Well,
Sure.
I'm excited to hear that. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks for your time.